in the form of logging, mining, conversion to agriculture, and I think I was primed to be horrified by it, but all that really made me do was not want to expose myself to nature anymore because it just upset me too much. I'm not an activist by nature, and so I kind of just buried it. And it wasn't until many years later when I found my way to birds that I realized, well, I can ignore this, but the birds can't ignore what's happening to the natural world. And if I care about them, as I kind of crazily came to, I need to get involved. And that led me into nature conservation, partly specifically groups that focus on threats to birds. In the Western Hemisphere, I might particularly note the American Bird Conservancy there, which is a fantastic group. And Meanwhile, I've been aware of the climate problem for many, many years. It really first came on my radar at the beginning of the 90s. And when a couple of scientists explained the science of what was going on. And there was a time in the 90s when it seemed like I could just not worry about it so much because the world seemed to be taking action. We'd already beaten the ozone layer problem with the fluorocarbons that were damaging the ozone layer. And it seemed like we might actually make progress toward flattening the curve in terms of carbon emissions. It came back on my radar in a big way about 6 years ago, because it was becoming clear that we had failed in that global effort. Far from reducing emissions, they were just climbing at tremendous rates, so that at this point, 30 years after the science was clear, we've put as much carbon in the air as we previously had in the history of the species, which is a remarkable fact, or at least since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And as somebody who had become very concerned about what was happening to the forests, what was happening to our grasslands, what was happening to our wetlands, what was happening to the oceans, what we were doing with our crazy bad industrial agriculture, I actually felt a personal frustration because it seemed that all anyone in the environmental movement was willing to talk about was climate, which, there was an argument for that maybe in the 90s and the early aughts when we might still have done something about it. But by the mid-teens, it was clear for a variety of reasons we were not going to be able to make enough changes fast enough to keep the thing from spinning out of control. So I got myself involved in writing about climate, and that's my journey.
Yeah. Thank you, John. What piques my curiosity is you mentioned how it was painful to watch what was going on, and there was a period of withdrawal.
Long period, yeah.
Yeah.
I decided it's too depressing to take a hike in the mountains.
So what the withdrawal even took you away from nature?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of rediscovered it in Central Park in New York, where I was living, when I realized, oh, nature is still there, and it is filling the park with birds every spring and fall on their migration. But it's so easy if you live, especially nowadays, you're living in these virtual worlds. It's so easy simply to tune out the existence of that natural world. And it was because of birds that I became aware, oh no, it's still there and it needs our help more than ever.
Yeah. What was it like to experience, like in Central Park, when you kind of rediscovered nature and birds? What did it feel like?
Well, it's just, I think they're very beautiful, these birds. So, I mean, I think it was mostly a sense of the incredible beauty, the incredible variety, and really the remarkable numbers there still are of these animals. But there was also, I think, attached to that, to the more subterranean level, a feeling that, okay, well, these birds are obviously not breeding at Central Park. I mean, it's really like 6 species that breed in the park. So somewhere there must still be habitat for them. And to be in an urban place and to see these obviously wild animals that are only visiting for a matter of hours or days, it is a portal to the continuing existence of those ecosystems that must still be functioning somewhere.
Yeah. So did you notice your discouragement lifting? Did you notice that something was changing inside of you? And did that have to do with just noticing the beauty, or did it have to do with getting involved with, activism, or how was that?
I think it helps, the antidote to despair is to do something. And obviously, no group, still less an individual, is going to be able to fix what's wrong with the world. But the thing is, if you're not just sitting in your bedroom abstractly worrying about the state of the world, if you're actually out there looking at the concrete problems, you find that some problems can be solved. Progress can be made somewhere. And in attempting to solve more manageable problems where victory is possible, somehow you just kind of forget about the despair because you're helping something. And really, I think where all of this, probably why everyone is here today, is we all want to do something. We all want to help. And it is simply the doing of something that is positive that keeps the despair at bay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for talking about that. I want to turn to Maria and Linda for a moment. Maria first, I think. The reason I invited Linda and Maria is because I'm inspired by their activity in our community. And, John's essay really pointed to finding hope by loving something in your community. And Maria, I wonder if you would go first and tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you become the person you are in terms of, your sense of empowerment, your sense of desire to contribute?
Yeah, I want to first thank everyone for joining us tonight. I want to say I stand for courage and dignity and interconnection for myself and all others. And I want to pause there. And I like the way I like the way that you framed the question and the way that Jonathan has been talking about journey, because I think journey is a really important part of this broader conversation. In terms of my personal journey, I was born in Watsonville. My mama, who's from Mexico, Colima, Mexico, took me back to Colima before I was a few months old, and I was raised there until I was 7 by my grandmother and aunts. And I came back to the States to start the second part of kindergarten. And many times, especially over the last 7 to 10 years, I've really given thanks to Creator for the foundation that I have based of those first years that formed ultimately who I think I am today. But I got lots of love and lots of hugs, and I always say I was rarely put down on the ground because of the many aunts and uncles who would just be holding me all day long. Like I'd go from one set of arms to another set of arms to another set of arms. I'm the first in my family. I'm first grandbaby in my family, a family of about 12 aunts and uncles. So that I think that gave me a really strong, loving foundation. And that love that I got when I was a child is the love that I give back to the world and to people and land now as I'm at my 41 plus years of age. When I came back to the States, my parents had been farm workers already, and so I joined them in picking grapes in San Joaquin Valley, and in Lodi, California. And I remember there's a really strong memory I have of my mom singing to music on the radio that she would blast, it was a little radio that she would carry with her. She was picking grapes and packing the bags, and I would help her, especially during the summer and on the weekends. And but my memory has to do a lot with her supervisors, or the supervisor of the cuadrilla, as we call it in Spanish. And when we would hear from far away the black and white truck, the humming of that truck coming closer and closer, she'd turn down the radio and she would stop singing, and she would lower her voice. And I didn't know at the time, I didn't have the language for it, but there was this clear understanding that there was some power dynamics that were happening there. And I wasn't able to put language to it until I was in high school. So I came back to Watsonville when I was in middle school, and here in Watsonville. And so at that time, I joined the autonomous chapter of the Brown Berets, and I was able to learn about some of the economic, social, and political frameworks that I was able to fit myself into, in terms of my power, my lack of power, but the potential for my power to really step into the world and make change. And so, unlike what Jonathan said, I am a natural activist. And so I've been an organizer, community organizer for a long time in Watsonville and Santa Cruz County, and regionally in the Tri-County area. And so my journey has a lot to do with my parents' journey as farm workers, and my coming to terms with being a woman of color, that is a first generation, a formally educated woman and mother, and oldest sister of 4 women in my family. And it's really my anchor, like my sense of self as a woman of color is really what gives me kind of my sense of power in the world, wherever I find myself and with whoever I find myself. In terms of the land, I've been on the Red Road. For any of you that are familiar with that term, I've been practicing Indigenous ceremony for a couple of decades with a Watsonville-based local group called Ishtatute, White Hawk Indian Council for Children. And it was there that I became very grounded in what it means to respect the earth, which is something that Jonathan mentioned earlier ago. And I want to talk later on, if there's an opportunity, about what it means to embody that kind of respect for the earth. But for now, I'll leave it at that. And I think that at the very core of my activist work these days, like I said at the very beginning, I stand for dignity and interconnection and courage for myself and all others. And it has everything to do with embodying anti-racism and identifying as a feminist, and also standing for the environment. And I think the intersection of those 3 things is what's going to carry us into a future that is based in the opportunity for local action. And at least the way that I make my contribution these days is through my co-leadership at a local farm called Esperanza Community Farms. And so I'll talk more about that if there's an opportunity later on. But that's a part of my journey. And yeah, I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Maria. Can I ask you just one question to follow up? John mentioned, a period where he withdrew because it was painful to watch what was going on, and I'm wondering, like, do you have moments, I mean, even just fleeting moments where, it just seems all so discouraging, and then kind of like what happens for you in those moments?
Yeah, those moments are less and less, I think, because I've taken more and more control of the kinds of things that I pay attention to. It's important to be informed, and I do my very best to be informed as a single mother too. But one thing that's just feels really big for me these days, and I hope that some of you can relate to this, is that the more and more that we pay literal attention to what's happening on a landscape beyond region, like at a national and international level, the more that we open up the opportunity for us to react locally to what's happening nationally and internationally. And I think that's a problem. So when I begin to feel like when I begin to feel like there's an imbalance for me personally, or I begin to feel hopelessness, I remember about what's happening here locally in my circle, in the several circles that I'm connected to, and it happens for me very quickly. I regain hopefulness because of the like Jonathan pointed to, the very many ways that we can contribute locally um, to a lot of just simply really good things.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Thanks very much for that. So Linda, hi. So Linda, you have a long history with social advocacy. Can you say where your sense of empowerment came from, and where your motivation to take action comes from, and what does it feel like today to be part of the efforts that you're part of?
Well, I also want to thank everyone who gave up the end of a gorgeous day to be on this call, although it's not the end of the day, of course, end of the daylight. I have been thinking since I knew we would all be together having this conversation about what even my sense of hope really feels like, looks like, and where in my history, how did it develop? And I'm honestly not sure, but I'll tell you some pieces that I think are related. I think that I came in with this strong sense of what felt right and what felt not right. So, and I had a childhood absolutely the opposite of what Mireya described. My father was from Nicaragua, and my mother was a white woman from Texas. They were married a very short time. I lived mostly in foster homes until I was 7. And one of the things that I took from that, I think, was that in each situation, there is something good to be had, even though there may be very difficult things as well. And so I found myself to be adaptive. I could adapt pretty quickly to whatever the new situation was. I moved to a number of different settings like that. And I've always sort of, however, thought of myself as somewhat of like a Cassandra type, in that I would have worries about things that I knew were true, but that maybe no one else realized. So an anecdote about that is, and I've told my chapter part of this story, which is when I was a little kid around 5, my favorite thing to do, one of my favorite things, was to squat down by a puddle left by rain on the sidewalk in San Francisco and stare into it until I could see some life. I knew there was life there. And a lot of times, I don't know whether I saw anything or not, but it felt like I would. And then along with that came a little bit of a worry that what would happen when the puddle dried up. I knew it would dry up. And what was going to happen to all those little things that I couldn't see. So I took that kind of awareness or whatever concern, into, it felt like it moved along with me into school. And I was very aware, and I'm sure everyone in my generation remembers duck and drill, duck and cover drills, where we were protecting ourselves from from weapons of mass destruction that were, coming our way from Russia at the time was the story, and also the worry. And I knew as I was ducking and covering that my desk or our desks would not protect us. And a wonderment, I just lived with this wonderment. Why were the adults saying to do this? And also why were weapons, going to be pointed at us or anyone, really? It just made no sense to me. So that was a sense of what felt wrong or disconnected to the story of how we were living and the messages we were getting as kids in school. And then, of course, I grew up, and I think history, that our moment in history really does very much affect what we are called to do or not to. So I grew up at a time when Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy and John Lennon were all murdered in a short amount of time there, and all the social movements that those people represented, and all of that was very affecting how I moved into political activism in terms of just first being in marches and then drilling down and getting more deliberate about what it was that I wanted to address. And even though at first I started out working in domestic violence, because violence had been a part of my childhood, so that was something that I felt compelled to try and bring some healing to, at least even just for myself and hopefully for others. But then I moved more deliberately into weapons of mass destruction. So I really became an anti-nuclear weapons activist. And I did that for a long time. And I was part of numbers of projects, freeze voter and other kinds of things, like, for instance, a neighbor and I started a group that wanted to send every representative in Congress to the Peace Museum in Hiroshima. And we thought that would be an important part of their education. So, I did many things like that. And in about 2008, I shifted to climate because that was another one of those things where you hear something on the news or you read something and not a lot of people are talking about it yet, kind of like coronavirus in December of last year. And you think, uh-oh, that's really big. That's really the thing that could take us down. So I got involved with first of all, again, like protests, like KXL protest in Washington, DC, Keystone XL pipeline. And, went to DC and went to the 40,000 people march and rally and then, and wondered, and I saw a sign there at that march saying carbon tax. And I thought, what is a carbon tax? How would that work? And then about 6 months later, that question got somewhat answered for me because I heard that there was going to be like a introduction to Citizens Climate Lobby in Santa Cruz. Somebody was hosting that and I went to it. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. It falls in line with so much of how I've been thinking about the absurdity of that we subsidize fossil fuel companies, gas and oil, to the tune of $642 billion a year of our tax dollars to do that. I walked around with that sense of, boy, that's really wrong. And I really want to address that. So Citizens Climate Lobby became the community for me where it felt as though there were enough of us aligned around and passionate around a solution that was really big and made a lot of sense and was possible. And I think that the possible is really what is at the heart of hope. I heard Joe Biden say today when he rolled out his science team that he had to, he was with Xi Jinping somewhere unlikely, like the Golan Heights, and said, Xi Jinping asked him, what is America? And he said, possibility. So I thought, yeah, that really is what I think is also for me at the heart of hope. Is I see the possibility. I see that the wrong, or what the wound is, the wound of disconnection really from Mother Earth, which is the basic wound that I think we all carry in this culture, is the and Joe Biden actually said this too. He said, hope is in our DNA. And you know, there's a dark side to that in our, because of our history. But I really appreciated the truth of that in that moment, especially in this moment of transition that we're all in now, we hope. And I'll stop there. There's, of course, as with everyone, lots more.
Well, thank you, Linda. I'm appreciating hearing about your early questioning of those bombing drills and stuff. You know, I think I was a kid that didn't question it, and but I'm glad. I think I've been appreciative of people like my wife, who from an early time that we met, you know, 45 years ago, was also questioning the status quo. I guess maybe I had more of a stake in the status quo and didn't question it so much. So John, I want to turn back to you because, you know, a lot of us are, you know, reacting to what happened in Washington, D.C. And I have this idea in my head that maybe, you know, a writer like you who's writing about characters and you know, having to put yourself in the place of characters who are making bad decisions, you know, people acting badly, that might in some way be an exercise for you to be able to cope with watching what went on in Washington and being able to, I don't know, somehow, yeah, cope with it.
Oh, well, you know, it was real whiplash 9 days ago, because we first got the results of the Georgia Senate elections, and something close to euphoria here. Kathy, my spouse equivalent, had worked very hard organizing for that election, and I was like, maybe Warnock, no way, both of them. And, you know, eating my words was delicious. And then, you know, a couple hours later, I was at the office and I got the call, oh, do you know what's going on in Washington? So eventually I came home and we kind of watched in horror. Most TV I've watched in, can't remember how long. You know, yes, I mean, there's a certain, there's a reason people are attracted to art, to literature, particularly narrative literature. That you know, stories have a beginning and a middle and an end, and it's interesting in the case of the last weeks of this administration to see, oh my God, you know, we've been worrying all along it was going to end terribly, and then it really did. And even though, yes, the loss of life, the desecration, everything it said about where, you know, the disconnect from reality of a substantial portion of this country, all terrible. And yet there's a certain, it was kind of cool to see, oh my God, you know, we were right. This is going to end like this. And, you know, if that's a consolation, I don't know quite what you were asking, but there is something about being able to fit what happens in the world into an existing framework of how you understand the world. it does not surprise me that so much of the country has decided to turn its back on reality. That seems to be almost an inevitable conclusion of the kind of technologies we've created. And also in a kind of an emotional inevitability, given how complex and frightening the world has become, that people will simply retreat into a fantasy. So yeah, I think, sure, I do view the world in that literary way, and it does help to make sense of things.
Thank you. I think I want to ask you about, there's something that I want to read that you've written and ask you about it. You wrote, what love is really about is a bottomless empathy born out of the heart's revelation that another person is every bit as real as you are. And this is why love, as I understand it, is always specific. Trying to love all of humanity may be a worthy endeavor, but in a funny way, it keeps the focus on the self and on the self's own moral or spiritual well-being. And I'm wondering if you, when you think of activism and activist, there's a lot of moralistic statements go flying around in activist circles that I'm sensitive to. Like, for example, we have an obligation to future generations, and I have a feeling that you didn't respond to birds by somebody saying to you, you have an obligation to those birds. It seems like your motivation came from somewhere else. So do moralistic statements like calling on our duty to the earth and so forth, do we need to just toss them and focus on something else? Is it appealing to our ego, our need to be good environmentalists?
No, I think it's a bad idea to throw out a sense of what's right. I think we are lucky here in Santa Cruz to be surrounded by a lot of people who feel that being mindful of your carbon footprint, being mindful of where your food comes from, how we treat the land, is the right thing to do. Even if it's not going to make any difference, it's still the right thing to do. So I think that's a crucial part. I think trying to motivate people by telling them that they're bad, that's a somewhat trickier strategy. But that's the larger thing here is that one of the reasons why it has been so hard to fight climate change, and there are many, many reasons, but one of the reasons is that it is abstract in that way. You can't see it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it. At most, you can kind of worry about your own skin, like, oh, is my house going to get flooded, or is a serious fire is going to burn it down, things like that. And because there's, you can't love unborn generations. And if you tell me you do, then I kind of don't believe you. Not what I understand love to be. I mean, unless you're like one of the great founders of a religion, maybe you could pull that off. But and because there's nothing positive that you're fighting for, you're sort of reacting against not only something that's invisible and abstract, but also just completely at a remove from you. It's really hard to, that's a tough thing to motivate people to care about.
Yeah.
And it also opens itself to all sorts of disinformation, as we've seen.
Yeah. Well, before we leave the subject of moralism, it feels to me like the people that stormed the Capitol were operating in a moral, righteous deal, right? They were like John Brown and the abolitionists who chose violence or whatever. They were on a crusade, and I'm wondering. I'm just wondering, if you see in our American tradition a nervousness about that kind of moralism.
Nah, no, because you go right on down the line. There are many, many righteous causes, and I think civil rights in this country, which is the successor to abolitionism, that is just such a patently righteous cause. I wouldn't want to begin to compare it to what was motivating those people who took over the Capitol. And the thing is that if you were an abolitionist, all you had to do was go down to the docks and there's the slave market. It's not like we're making this up. There were, African Americans in chains, known fact, not in dispute, completely beyond dispute. So whatever else you can say about John Brown, he was responding to something incontrovertibly wrong and fully evident. So what's the difference here is that you have people responding to something that's just made up, a fantasy. And so, yeah, the moral fervor is the same, but yeah, I struggle to find the positive, loving impulse behind those people in the Capitol.
Yeah, I understand. Some people, I mean, your writing, your essays in the New Yorker have struck a nerve with some people, and some people have made some kind of nasty ad hominem attacks. And how have you learned to process personal attacks?
Well, by shutting down my access to them. So, I'm not on social media, which is where almost all the ad hominem attacks occur. People don't say these things to your face. And they don't say them by and large in responsible edited public fora. They say them in these modes of expression where you're rewarded for saying extreme things and never held accountable for them. So, I basically just ignore it. But that does remind me that Maria, before we started, said she had some responses to that piece, and I'd be curious to open it up and kind of get the attention off me and hear something from Maria and from Linda on this, on all these subjects, actually.
Great, let's do it. Maria?
Yeah, thank you, John. One of the things that I told Jonathan before we opened up tonight's forum, that I reread his article that was in the New York Times several times, and it's such a dynamic piece, and it I had to stop after every several sentences because it's very dense, and I had either a critique or a comment. As I'm sure all of you did or do. Hopefully, all of you have read it. But I guess I'll start with a general kind of summary of it. And one of the things I really appreciate about your article, Jonathan, is the way that you point, again, and I mentioned this earlier because I was inspired by your article to think about the power of local. And you point to the very many ways that, regardless of the cause, regardless of the kind of the personal motivation to act, it's the now and it's the here that matters. And it's the now and it's the here that gives us hope. And I think that's a really that's one of the things that I took away from your piece, and it's one of the things that I've known and that I've taken to heart and that moves me to action. And I've been in the nonprofit sector for so I'm 41 since I was 15, and here I lost my train of thought here, but I just realized the power of local, and I've been able to piece together kind of almost as a puzzle what I said earlier about the kind of our universal grounding in the earth and our universal grounding in the kind of localized communities that we can share. there's a lot of power in that. I'm really passionate about the how to get to where we want to be, and how to get to where we want to be. And I think that's one of the places where a lot of us get stuck. And, you know, I don't, for me, it's an elephant in the room to not speak to being the person of color that's on this particular forum, and to see the very many white faces on this forum. I thank you for the invitation, Rick, to be here. There's something that almost brought me to tears about your piece, Jonathan, which speaks to the here and now. To me, is a part of the experience and history of people of color and immigrant people living in survival mode. So, and I want to say that again, because I think about it a lot, because I live it. It's my very real and raw experience. You know, my parents survived for decades here as immigrants, as invisible people, as marginalized people, as farm workers who had to turn the radio down when their supervisors came around, you know, so that they would just not be paid attention to so much and be called out, and maybe be in trouble over who they were and who they are and what they stood for and what they did. But you didn't say this explicitly, Jonathan, but what I pulled away from your article was that there is actually a lot of potential, a really serious amount of potential in looking to people with lived experience, people who are living in survival mode, and that the way that we are so mindful about where we are and the very present moment and the kinds of meaning to the action that we take in the moment has so much to do with the kind of future that we might have collectively. It's something that I push to explore very much. I mentioned earlier, I'll just say one other thing, but I mentioned earlier, I'm a proud co-leader of Esperanza Community Farms. It's a 2-acre farm in Watsonville, on the outskirts of Watsonville. And we serve, we're a project of the Second Harvest Food Bank, but we serve low-income people. We're a CSA project. We deliver every 2 weeks a bag of freshly picked organic produce to folks who would otherwise not have access to vegetables that are freshly picked and organic. And that alone to me is very significant. You know, in John's article, he spoke about the Homeless Garden Project and the fact that he's a member of that project. There's a calling in that you make, Jonathan, indirectly to the experience of people on the very marginal, you know, in the very people who are marginalized. And we haven't yet arrived at, we haven't yet figured out how to do that. You know, even just looking at this forum and every other forum that I've seen or been a part of in the last year and a half, 2 years, as we've been so kind of entangled in the racial equity work and the work around political justice and economic justice and feminist justice. And I mean, I guess all that to say is, I live in Watsonville. I'm a mother of 2. I respect the earth, and I embody that by rolling up my sleeves twice a week and literally picking vegetables and delivering them to my neighbors who I know don't have access to good food, which I know has an impact that I can't even measure. There's an infinite amount of entry points, Jonathan, that you point to.
Well, exactly. I mean, if I would say that the danger when you have an issue like climate change, which is kind of a threat to everything, is that it seems like, well, that's the only thing you should be working on. And if you can't justify it in terms of that struggle, what are you doing working on it? And meanwhile, like right under our noses, there's this tremendous social transformation going on, empowering all sorts of people who, as you say, have been living in survival mode for the entire history of the country. Yeah, you might be able to find some ways to relate that to the large environmental crisis, but you don't have to. I think of Dale Jameson, whose book Reason in a Dark Time was a life changer for me when it came to thinking about climate. He says something like, we're constantly being told we live in a time unlike any other, and this is the last chance to make a difference. And his rejoinder is, every time is like no other, and it's always the last chance to make a particular difference. So I'm glad you took that, because I think that's my feeling, is any place you can go to work with kindness to make something better, that's all part of the same struggle, even if you cannot relate it in a direct way to parts per million of carbon in the air.
Linda, I'm thinking you might have something to say, but first I want to invite people to write in the chat if they have any questions or topics that you would like the speakers to address. Linda?
Yeah, well, speaking of parts per million of carbon in the air, sort of the other end of the spectrum, I'm curious, Jonathan, about how in the process of writing about these things, you find yourself negotiating with what's possible. And an example for me is in my work with Citizens Climate Lobby, we are advocating to get this tax and revenue neutral dividend so as to bring emissions down to 1.5 degrees centigrade or lower, but at least 1.5 centigrades. Now that's been what the Paris Climate Agreement, has set as a we must do, or we certainly should do. That's our metric. We're measuring against that. But I wonder about the possibility, and there are certainly people out there who are working on this, about climate restoration, of bringing it down below 350, down to 280 pre-industrial or at industrial, before we derange the climate this profoundly. So I'm curious, when in your writing, and even in that article, What If We Stop Pretending, do you find yourself negotiating with what's possible?
What do you mean by negotiate?
Well, I know that when you launch into a piece of writing and you're the writer, you're going somewhere. And where you're going to land, it's a process to get there. And so what do you finally advocate for? Is it everything? Is it total? This is where I'm going and what I want. Or do you have to negotiate with the what's possible, what seems possible or not possible?
Yeah, I definitely take into account what's possible, and I think I don't write with activist intention, or I seldom do. But I start with the premise that, well, let's try to look at reality and tell the truth about it. And if you do that, then you're going to subtract a lot of what you had hoped would be possibilities, because it does not remotely accord with reality. And then, yeah, and after that, it's really more a matter for me as a writer of asking questions. So you can disagree with the premise of that little piece in the New Yorker, but it really was my statement that I've thought about this, I've read a lot. I don't think that 1.5 degrees Celsius target is possible. I mean, it's literally scientifically possible, but politically and in terms of human nature, I think it's a very, very remote possibility. So then, now what? And the immediate question for me is, well, how do I have any hope for the future? And that becomes, and the writing becomes an attempt to answer the question that the honest appraisal has raised. But that does not, and I think it's possible to misunderstand me. I think we should make absolutely every effort to drastically reduce our carbon emissions. And I think the idea of a carbon tax, which has been around, as you say, for a long time, I think that's a key part of it. And I think it's and this is the thing. There are some people, really care about the plight of the Uyghurs in China, and they're going to devote all their time to raising consciousness and international pressure to try to do something about the oppression of this ethnic minority in Tibet and the other high country. It's like, great. And some people care, they're just freaked out by what we're doing to the atmosphere and thus to the entire planet. And if I would love it if that attracted, most people who want to do something. That would be great, because we really could use all hands on deck there. But it is a matter of you do what you care about, not, it's more a matter of want to than, I think, hearing from the outside you must.
Thank you, folks. Bob, I think I'll ask people from the chat to speak, because some people are writing to me personally, directly to me.
Well, Rick, we haven't heard very much from you.
From me?
No, I know you're the moderator. Sorry,
yeah.
It was a lame joke.
Okay, so I'll anoint you with my wisdom at the very end. Jackie Griffith, I wonder if you want to ask your question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
It wasn't really a question. I thought you said that we could put things in there that we wanted to see discussed.
Yes,
And
please. Yeah, absolutely.
Just last night at a meeting of what I thought would be understanding racial equity needs to take on at this point, was saying maybe she was kidding. I didn't ever get a chance to ask her, but she said, oh, wait another 50 years, we have to take care of the climate. And that is ridiculous, because environmental justice means that part of what we're going to do is to clean up the air, the industries, and that includes the areas that are suffering with the toxics and the spills and everything, and make sure that we take care of that.
Great. I wonder if any of our panelists want to make any comments about the connection between environmental activism and social justice.
I'd love to share something. Jonathan, gosh, some of my people of color friends who see today's recording might bag on me for this, but I have to thank you for pointing out in your article, and I have it in front of you, but I'm not going to look for it. You pointed out in some way that actually, if we come to terms with the place that we are in this time, in terms of environmental degradation, and the fact that we actually maybe have gone too far beyond the point of trying to fix it, that environmental justice, for lack of a better word, takes precedence over racial equity.
I say that?
Is how I interpreted it.
Oh, no. I think I said the opposite.
Hold on. Don't react to it. Take a deep breath, because I actually want to agree with you on that. I want to agree with you on that, because the earth is what we all have in common. Not all human beings, beyond human beings, all beings And I can't help but think about the very many ways that I have seen, hopefully not in a tokenized way, the very many virtual convenings that take into account the land that we're all on, across the nation. That's how very many workshops are opening up these days. We say our name, and then we say what land we're on, and from the indigenous perspective, right? And it's okay to do that. It's a really great step, and I'm really proud that we're doing that. And I think it's someone in the chat texted me earlier. Can you speak more to what you mentioned earlier about the red road? The red road. I'm not going to elaborate on it, but it's an indigenous way of being in the world. It's a set of indigenous cultures and values that we. It's a set of cultures. It's a set of values that we live by and show up with in this world. And for hundreds of years, possibly, we have not paid attention to the messages that indigenous people and elders have had to say about the environment, about how to take care of the environment, about how to take care of each other, and about how to be kind beyond just what comes out of our mouth to each other. And so, again, Jonathan, that's the way that I interpreted it because of my personal experience and journey in this world. And again, I want to agree with you on that because of the fact that the earth is what we all share as a universal value, as a universal interest. It needs to be a strong interest that we all have to protect the earth. It's where we all come from. It's what we all depend on for life itself. You spoke to so many different things in your article. You spoke about death. You spoke about systems. You spoke about the very many kind of personal causes that move us to act in a way to protect the earth. And that's my one comment, which I think is probably the greatest insight that I got from your article.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think it's there is definitely a social justice component when you talk about, say, climate, because it's not really yes, they're typically disadvantaged people live in crappy places by oil refineries, and cleaning up those facilities does align to a certain extent with social justice. But the larger issue is that the wealthy, both individuals and nations, can take pretty good care of themselves. Those wealthy and people and nations are also inordinately contributing to climate change, and the vast brunt of climate change is going to fall on people who did not have much to do with causing it. So that's a straight up. To that extent, I completely agree with Jackie that there is you can't actually separate social justice from, say, the climate conversation. But it also should be, I would add, that if you could, it wouldn't mean that we shouldn't be paying attention to social justice issues. Those are valuable and demand our attention regardless of what's going on environmentally. In fact, because the result of climate change is going to be that things get less and less stable, it's going to increase tribalism. Any effort to try to make the world a more equitable and kinder place has to be considered in that context.
Thank you, John. I want to ask Mike Saint if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. First of all, I'd like to thank John and Linda and Maria for joining us. It's been very interesting and informative. This is for all three of you, or just Jonathan. I've heard a lot in my research and reading that the biggest impediment to dealing with climate change is the dysfunction of the US Congress and their inaction on this climate crisis. What would your thoughts be on that subject with the politic issue?
Thank you, Mike.
Well, I will say, I suspect Linda can speak to this more directly because I think she has a lot more experience with the frustrations of the US Congress. it sounds like a quip, and there's a lot behind this thought. The Congress doesn't represent unborn Americans. It does not represent, you know, our children's grandchildren. It represents people who are living right now and who are afraid of certain things and who are struggling to make ends meet. And if something is politically unpopular, I don't think the difficulty originates in the Congress itself. I think if there were a strong constituency for making really serious changes, that is more than 50% in the various states, I think our representatives would probably listen. I don't actually buy the idea that they're just bought off by big money. That's certainly part of it. It certainly makes things even worse. But the fact is, you know, the person in the middle-class house in Wichita is worrying about how am I going to pay the rent. They're not actually thinking about climate. And if they are thinking about it, they're probably thinking about what they heard on Fox News. So I'm reluctant to blame a single institution for the world's problem, because it's not just here. It's with a lot of other countries are not really doing very well with this.
Thank you.
Linda,
But Linda might have more to say on that particular thought.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. I certainly agree with everything you've said about that. And I would want to add that really, it seems to me that racism in our country is at the absolute heart of the dysfunction that you might be seeing in the Congress, but really where you're also seeing it is out there in the world on the streets and in this latest event, I guess we can call it, on January 6th, the insurrection. Because white supremacy is still absolutely at the core of this culture. And that's the bottom line is that's exploitation of our resources, of our earth, and our people. And instead of it being our people, it's you know, certain dispensable people, disposable people to serve the privileged. And that's a system that that we all participate in some way or other, and some of us in lots of ways. So some of us are you know, much more privileged and some less privileged, and that system, that there can be such inequity day by day by day and year by year, and without an intervention really at that level, we're going to continue to have a lot of dysfunction, yes, in Congress, but just more entirely in our society. And climate change and that kind of dysfunction go absolutely hand in hand. One wouldn't really be able to exist without the other. Those dysfunctions are absolutely dependent upon each other. They express each other. So working for the Congress, as far as we work with Congress, and you know, I've lobbied the most conservative, like Mike Rogers from Alabama, I'll just say, for instance, and the most possibly progressive representatives as well. And the task of Citizens Climate Lobby is to go in straight through all of prejudice, all of resistance, and just speak empathically to that person, and respect them in some way or another. Now, that's a almost impossible task sometimes, honestly, and yet it is required if we are going to actually touch people's hearts and create a bond. There has to be some kind of bond. You know, our basic wounding is disconnect, and so bonding is what It has to happen in the political process and in every other process as well, really. So I would just leave it there to say, here we are with this extraordinarily dysfunctional system that is Congress, and so many other dysfunctional systems as well. And still the requirement is the same, is to make a genuine connection in service to really to bringing us back into some kind of balance with our earth.
Thank you, Linda.
Hi, thank you. I wonder if Mary Flodine or Joe would speak there. Joe or Mary, otherwise
Hi, you guys. Hey, this is Mary. Yeah, my question is to Jonathan is about your actual art, your process as an artist, and speaking, if you could speak a little possibly to your new novel, your 2021 novel coming out, and your process of writing, and then speak to the fact that artists can play an important role as thought leaders. But we know that fiction that tries to beat people over the head with a particular point of view is never enjoyable reading. So as a novelist, how do you walk that line between grappling with the big issues of social and environmental justice and writing a nuanced novel that will touch people's hearts and minds?
Thanks, Mary, and hi, Joe. And it's a good question, and I don't, not going to talk long about my art, but every now and then, it is possible to slip in a little bit of activism. I have some problems with letting cats outdoors, and about page 550 of a 570-page novel, I allowed myself to bring attention to this issue. What these introduced species are doing to our natural ecosystems. But by and large, you're absolutely right. You can't beat people over the head. I mean, and I have a very keen nose when somebody's trying to sell me something with fiction, because that's not art. I'll just go out on a limb. I'll say it. I think the artist's responsibility is to try to tell the truth. And the truth tends to be complicated, and it doesn't tend to be painted in black and white. I mean, every once in a while, there are issues, and I would say racism in this country is something that's close to being a clear-cut, no argument, moral condition. But by and large, well, let's just speak for myself. My impulse when I find myself giving vent to an opinion in my fiction is to immediately look at it. It looks like an opinion on the page, and to try to argue myself out of it, because I think that's really more the artist's responsibility. And yeah, you can be a thought leader, I suppose, but I think artists by and large, they just want to do their work, and they want to contribute in that way. They want to give a gift. It is a gift economy, I think, ultimately, the world of art. You've received gifts, and you're trying to give back something. And I think simply to participate in that alternative economy, that gift economy, amounts to, it's not quite subversion, but it's good to keep that notion alive. That's sort of the contribution I think I make socially, is to say, you know, it's not all about self-promotion and money and all of that. Sometimes you do things just because you want to give something. I'm not going to say any more. I could say more and probably say it better, but I won't. But thank you for the question. And thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Russ, can you get ready to, we have a Russ Burchet with us, who's going to sing a song for us at the end of the program. So I just want to give him a heads up to get ready. And at this point, I wonder if you, the panelists, would each just think of anything, final thoughts that you want to say on our subject, something to love, something to hope for.
Well, I'd be happy to start.
Thank you.
Shall I start?
Go for it.
Please.
All right. Because you mentioned letting cats out, Jonathan, I want to say that a transformational part of my last few years has been that the last cat I had was truly like the love of my life cat. But he was also an extraordinary predator. I mean, extraordinary. And I'd never experienced anything like that. And so I had this horrible conflict of loving him beyond all measure and being horrified by him beyond all measure, and actually developing PTSD around, coming home and finding body parts always in my house. So when he was finally probably predated, I mean, probably some bigger predator got him, I thought, okay, I can't do that anymore. As much as I have always loved cats and always had them. And so I fell in love with birds. That's exactly what happened. And I'm not educated about birds really, a little tiny bit, but it's only the birds that come around in my house, but they have become like such a community to me, and such a piece of, like you said, birds were the portal for you. And for me, birds were the way in which I came to accept that I couldn't any longer have a cat, even though I totally identified as a person with a cat. So I think that these small but really important transformations we make in our own practices and our own lives, where we hold a line, where I, for instance, never thought I would hold a line like that, no cats ever again, it's important to note them because they are the kinds of changes that we make inside of ourselves that allow us to go out into the world sort of more defined as this is how I will be, this is what I will stand for, and this is what I will do. And I really never shared that before, I think, in any kind of public way about the cat, Milo the cat. But it has been a grace for me. And the other little piece of it is when my dog died a year ago, I felt just like I feel about climate change, like, oh my God, how am I going to live with this death? I'd had her for 14 years. And I kept thinking that I would get another dog when the grief subsided, but the grief never subsided. And so we got another dog 3 weeks ago. And lo and behold, just like with climate change, I find I can live with all this grief of loss, because I do feel as though we are losing so much in our planet and our species and our habitats and everything. And yet I can completely love this dog. I'm amazed at how much love. And I'm a person without grandchildren, so I guess this is it for me. And I just wanted to say those things as a way of marking how we discover things that we didn't really expect.
Thank you, Linda.
Do you mind, John, if I go next to give you the last?
Yeah, go for it, Maria.
I'll be brief, and I'll just say, what if we stopped pretending? Let's stop pretending. Because in fact, I think that we are. And let us pass the mic on to people of color and indigenous communities so that we can hear loudly, more loudly, what they have been trying to say, trying to communicate with the rest of the world, what is happening to the earth. and so that we can hear about the disconnection that they have been seeing for a long time between human beings and the earth. I think women have a really strong and important role to play in the next decade, at the next period of time. And I think women of color, Indigenous women, have a really, let us listen to their voices. There's one thing that like very many things, like very many things that are a double-edged sword. I think that it is a double-edged sword for us to think that that we should only think about local and what is in our circle and what we can do now and here. We must not forget about what's happening on the other side of the world. And we must not forget about what's happening in the next city or in the next county or in the next state. And I want to mention, for any of you that are familiar with the 4 levels of change and oppression, it is personal. Let us take personal enough what is happening to the earth, personal enough so that we can take action. It is interpersonal. Let us build relationships so that we are connected authentically and genuinely to our neighbors, not only our neighbors within our familiar circles, our neighbors across language, our neighbors across gender, our neighbors across geography. But it's also it's also institutional, it's also cultural. And one thing that I've learned to do over the last year, as there's been so much change in our country, is to think that everything I do has an effect on those 4 levels of change and oppression. It's personal. It's got to be personal to me, personal enough. And what I think and do and is going to affect the people that I interact with every day and every week and every month. It's going to affect my home and my community. But I also want to affect change at a policy level, at a cultural level. What can I do to begin to change the cultural values of our community and our city and our county? So let us not get too comfortable in the now and here and our home and our circle and our Santa Cruz County, because we are a bubble. Let us burst that bubble when we need to burst the bubble. And coming back to journey, that was, I think, one of the first things we opened up with. What is our journey? It's about process. To me, process is almost a synonym to journey. It is about the process. It is about our journey. It starts with us. And so, Jonathan, thank you for a very inspiring essay. I want to come back to it as often as I can to guide me in my work as a co-leader of Esperanza Community Farms and the Arts Council. I thank you, Rick, for inviting me. Thank you all for joining this conversation tonight.
You're welcome. John, I see Russ is ready to sing our song. Do you have any comments that you want to make?
I'll be super brief and say that it was a real gift to get to be in conversation with Maria and Linda. Linda, just by the way, that was an amazing story you told. I've experienced one or two similar kinds of transformation, but they're too personal to talk about. I don't know. I think Maria's right. We are in a bubble here, but I also think part of what makes this a bubble is that it consists of people who are paying attention to the rest of them. And it's a small transformation. I could never have imagined living in California. It was always like, the woo-woo land. And in fact, to be immersed in a community where people are talking about issues, where people are really paying attention, not only to what's wrong with the world, but also what individually they might do to make it better. That turns out to be kind of, without my knowing it, exactly what I wanted to be part of. So thanks again to everyone. And now turn it over to the musician. It's a good thing it didn't play sooner because we would have then had to talk afterwards. Suffered in comparison.
Yeah, Russ, I'm glad you made it.
Yeah, well, I had it on my calendar. You're not going to believe this, but the reason I spaced is because I was writing a song. I kid you not. When you get
That's a
that,
good excuse.
you drop everything and you just grab a pen and you do it. So this is not that song. This is a song from a few years ago. And I actually kind of wish I had no need to sing this song anymore, but it seems perennial. So I'll just start into. Can you hear the guitar? Okay. It's been talked about on corners. It's been talked about in cars. It's been overheard in boardrooms. It's been overheard in bars. It's been seen in public places. It's been difficult to hide. It's been seen out on the highway with its thumb out for a ride. Love's been seen alive. Everyone's finding traces. Love's been seen alive. In least expected places. Times are getting harder now, but I know we'll survive, 'cause love's been seen alive. There's another war beginning. It's been waiting in the wings. Fought for power, fought for hunger, for 1,000 other things. There's a poor man who's been crawling. There's a rich man standing tall. There's a world of people starving while there's food enough for all. But love's been seen alive. And we must all remember love's been seen alive. The storm won't last forever. Clouds are rolling over now, but I know we'll survive, 'cause love's been seen alive. You have never made the papers, 'cause your picture doesn't sell. There's no television coverage, 'cause you don't project that well. All the movie men reject you. You just don't look the part. They're not auditioning for someone who is speaking from the heart. They have called you revolution, just a misdirected scheme. Put out warnings to the people, said you're just a rebel's dream. They have crucified and stoned you, put a price upon your head, drew a bead on you in marches, left you in the streets for dead. But love's been seen alive. Though they break your bones, love's been seen alive. Ha! It's only sticks and stones. I know, I believe in promises. I know we'll survive, 'cause love's been seen alive. Love's been seen alive. Love's been seen alive. Love's been seen alive. Love's been seen alive.
Gotta look up, Russ. There's lots of hands clapping.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Glad
Russ.
for the opportunity to share it with you.
Yeah, thanks so much. That was wonderful. I just want to thank John and Linda and Maria for connecting here tonight. It was really special for me, and I think all of us. And it was great to be here with so many familiar faces and people that I'm glad to be in community with in one way or another. Thank you for coming and spending this time together. We'll be in touch. Bye now.
See you later.
Why of gentleness and then the way of gentleness. First, the why. Why shouldn't we be belligerent? Isn't